I sat with my back to him, staring at the mahogany wall of his study, letting the volume of his voice wash over me like static interference. Behind me, Colonel Miller, my mother's new boyfriend, was pacing the floor, his boot heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood as he delivered his sermon. He was ranting about the sanctity of his home, about civilian laziness, and how I needed to understand that there was a hierarchy in this house that I was failing to respect. I didn't interrupt him. I just waited, my fingers tracing the heavy silver-embroidered fabric resting in my lap. When he finally paused to take a breath, demanding to know if I was even listening, I decided it was time. I slowly spun the high-backed leather chair around to face him. I wasn't crying and I certainly wasn't cowering. I held his gaze with a calm that seemed to unsettle him, and then I lifted my hand. I wasn't holding a cell phone or a tissue, I was holding a pair of heavy, silver shoulder boards, the single star of a rear admiral, lower half. I placed the stars on his desk with a deliberate heavy clack that echoed in the sudden silence. "You're right, Colonel," I said, my voice dropping an octave into the tone I used for briefing the Joint Chiefs. "The chain of command is absolute, and you are currently screaming at a flag officer. Attention on deck. To understand how a family dinner devolved into a military tribunal, you have to go back 3 weeks to when I first arrived to help my mother settle in. My mother, Carol, a gentle woman who believed peace was always worth the price of her own dignity, had moved in with Miller and begged me to come smooth the transition. But Miller, an insecure Army colonel who treated his suburban household like a forward operating base, didn't want help. He wanted recruits. Because I worked in consulting, my necessary cover for my role at Naval Intelligence, he dismissed me immediately. He saw a woman in jeans and a hoodie, and assumed I was some aimless tech support girl drifting through life without purpose. The tension finally snapped during what was supposed to be a casual lunch. My phone buzzed on the table, a specific, rhythmic vibration that meant a Level 1 secure line check-in from Cyber Command. It wasn't a social call, it was a matter of national security. But before I could even reach for it, Miller's hand shot out. He snatched the phone off the placemat, his face twisting into a sneer of performative discipline. "No gadgets at the table, little lady," he barked, sliding the phone into his own pocket as if confiscating a toy from a toddler. "I don't care who is texting you. In my world, we have discipline. We have focus. You drift through life thinking the rules don't apply to you, but under my roof, you will learn respect." I sat there, my blood running cold, not from fear, but from the sheer operational insanity of what he had just done. He hadn't just been rude, he had taken possession of a classified uplink device. He stood there, chest puffed out, lecturing me about real work and military bearing, completely oblivious to the fact that the woman he was dressing down authorized airstrikes before he'd even had his morning coffee. He thought he was disciplining a wayward stepdaughter. He didn't realize he had just violated the personal space of the director of cyber warfare operations. He wanted a war? He was about to get a masterclass. For the next 2 weeks, my life became a bizarre, suffocating split screen, reality, oscillating between two completely different universes. At home, under the command of Colonel Miller, I was a disorganized civilian, a project that needed to be managed and disciplined. He instituted what he called basic training for the household, which mostly consisted of him hovering over me while I did menial chores, criticizing my technique as if folding laundry was a tactical operation. I remember standing in the utility room, my hands smelling of lemon detergent, while he lectured me on the proper way to align the corners of a bath towel. He called himself the commander of the house, a title he used without a hint of irony, demanding that the kitchen be run with the same logistical precision he claimed to use for his battalion supply trucks. He loved to brag about those trucks. Over dinner, while I picked at my food, he would launch into long, self-aggrandizing monologues about organizing convoy schedules and managing fuel allotments in peacetime Germany. He would look at me, shaking his head with a pitying smirk, and compare his heavy lifting to what he called my computer games. He had decided that my job in consulting was essentially tech support, resetting passwords and fixing printers for people who did actual work. I sat there, listening to him bloviate about moving crates of MREs, while My mind drifted to the operation I had authorized 3 hours prior. An operation that required moving digital assets across hostile sovereign borders without triggering a diplomatic incident. My mother made it impossible to speak up. One afternoon, after Miller had shouted at me for parking my car 3 inches over the driveway line, she pulled me aside in the kitchen. My mother, Carol, a woman who had spent her life shrinking herself to fit into the spaces men left for her, squeezed my hand with desperate eyes. "Just humor him, Sarah," she whispered, her voice trembling with the need to keep the peace. "He's very important at the base. You have to understand, being a colonel is a big deal. He's under a lot of pressure and he just wants things to be right." I looked at her, fighting the urge to scream. She saw a powerful man, I saw a mid-level manager with a Napoleonic complex. "It's fine, Mom," I lied, swallowing the bitter taste of being unseen in my own family. "I'll move the car." The transition to my real life was always jarring. The moment I left the driveway, the mask slipped. I wasn't Sarah the stepdaughter. I was a Rear Admiral, Select, one of the youngest women in naval history to be tapped for flag rank due to my specialized work in asymmetric warfare. I would drive to a nondescript federal building, pass through 3 layers of biometric security and step into the skiff, a sensitive compartmented information facility where the air was always cool, sterile, and silent. Inside that windowless room, the noise of Miller's ego didn't exist. Here, generals twice my age, men with stars on their shoulders that Miller would have saluted until his arm fell off, stood when I entered the room. I didn't manage supply trucks, I managed the invisible infrastructure of modern conflict. I spent my days staring at high-resolution monitors, authorizing Level 5 kinetic cyber strikes that could disable a foreign power's power grid or ground a rogue satellite. My work phone, the one Miller had confiscated like a toy, was actually a secure satellite uplink capable of reaching the president's daily briefing team. I thought I was keeping these 2 worlds perfectly separated, but I hadn't accounted for the one person in the family who actually knew what to look for. My grandfather, Frank, a retired Navy Master Chief who could read a room better than a radar system, had come over for a weekend visit. He was a man of few words, hardened by 30 years at sea, and unlike my mother, he didn't buy Miller's bluster for a second. I caught him watching me throughout the day, not judging, just observing. He noticed the way I instinctively scanned the exits when we entered a restaurant. He noticed that I never sat with my back to the door, and he definitely noticed the heavy, encrypted phone I kept within arm's reach at all times. The moment of truth happened in the garage. I was digging through my overnight bag to find a charger, and the fabric shifted, revealing the matte black grip of my service pistol and the leather wallet containing my credentials. I froze, quickly covering it, but when I turned around, Grandpa Frank was leaning against the doorframe, a knowing glint in his eye. He didn't look shocked. He looked proud. He walked over, his footsteps quiet on the concrete, and leaned in close, his voice a conspiratorial rumble. "You outrank him, don't you, kid?" I felt a smile tug at the corner of my mouth, the first genuine smile I'd had in weeks. I put a finger to my lips, signaling for his silence. "OPSEC, Grandpa," I whispered. "Need to know basis." He chuckled, a low rasping sound, and patted my shoulder. Aye, ma'am. My lips are sealed." It was a small victory, but it gave me the strength to endure what was coming. Miller loved the noise of authority, the shouting, the saluting, the pomp. I lived in the silence of it. And I knew that when the noise met the silence would win every time. Miller announced the command dinner with the gravity of a man planning the invasion of Normandy. He had invited his battalion's senior staff, a collection of ambitious majors and captains, who depended on his evaluation reports, to witness his perfect traditional family. It was pure theater. He wanted them to see the obedient wife, the submissive stepdaughter, and the colonel at the head of the table, carving the roast like a king. But his vision for the evening required a supporting cast, and he made it clear exactly what role I was expected to play. He didn't ask if I was free, he conscripted me. He stood in the kitchen, checking his reflection in the microwave door, and assigned me to the entryway. "You'll take coats, pour drinks, and keep the hors d'oeuvres moving," he said, not even bothering to make eye contact. Then he turned, his face hardening into that patronizing sneer he reserved just for me. "And Sarah, don't speak unless spoken to. These are warfighters, not geeks. They talk tactics, not tech support. Just try not to embarrass me." I looked at him, and I felt a familiar tally click over in my mind. It was the laundry list of every time he had called me useless, every time he had mocked my silence as weakness. But this time, the anger didn't burn hot. It froze into a cold, predatory calm. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady. "But I have a condition. I have a work function that afternoon, so I'll be coming directly from the office. I might be a few minutes late." He waved his hand dismissively, clearly relieved he wouldn't have to argue. "Just get here, and change into something respectful before you start serving." As soon as I walked away, I pulled out my secure phone. I didn't call a cab. I called my aide-de-camp, a sharp lieutenant commander named Evans. I told him I needed the official government vehicle, the armored black SUV with the government plates, prepped for a VIP transport. Then, I sat down at my secure terminal and made one small administrative adjustment. I updated my official biography on the unclassified Dodi network. I knew how junior officers worked. Before this dinner, Miller's aides would be digitally vetting everyone in the house to prep their boss. I wanted to make sure that when they searched for Sarah, they didn't find a consultant. They found a flag officer. That night, behind the locked door of the guest room, I pulled the dress whites out of the garment bag. As the iron hissed against the heavy fabric, smoothing out the gold lace, on the sleeves I wasn't just pressing a uniform. I was preparing a weapon. He wanted a traditional military evening. He wanted to show his officers what authority looked like. So I decided to give him exactly what he asked for. By the time I slipped through the side door, the command dinner was already devolving into a one-man show. I could hear Miller's voice booming from the dining room, slurring slightly as he recounted, for the third time I suspected, his legendary handling of a supply chain crisis in the late 90s. I paused in the hallway, unseen, and peeked around the corner. His officers, decent men and women who likely just wanted a hot meal and a quiet evening, looked pained. They were nursing their drinks and forcing polite laughter, hostages to his ego just as much as my mother was. I pulled my trench coat tighter around me, buttoned all the way to the chin to hide the stiff white collar underneath. I needed a moment to center myself before the storm, so I bypassed the kitchen and headed straight for the dim quiet of his study. I barely had time to close the door and reach for the phone before the heavy thud of footsteps announced his arrival. He hadn't just noticed I was late, he had noticed I wasn't immediately serving him. The door flew open, bouncing off the stopper with a violence that rattled the frames on the wall. Miller stood there, his face flushed with bourbon and indignation. He didn't see a stepdaughter, he saw insubordination. He marched in, slamming the door behind him to trap us in his private little kill box, his eyes glazed with a mixture of alcohol and rage. "You think you can just waltz in here whenever you please?" he hissed, his voice rising with every word. "I told you to be here at 1800 hours. My guests are waiting for service, and you're hiding in here playing with your phone?" I didn't answer immediately. I just walked to the desk and sat down in his high-backed leather chair, turning it away from him. This enraged him. It was the ultimate disrespect, the final checkmark on a ledger of defiance he had been keeping since the day we met. He started screaming at my back, the veins in his neck bulging as he listed my offenses, my silence, my laziness, the way I refused to play the role of the grateful subordinate. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he roared, slamming his hand on the desk. "In this house I am the ranking officer. My word is law. You are a civilian guest in a military household, and you will respect the chain of command." I let the silence hang for a heartbeat. A heavy, suffocating pause that sucked the air out of the room. Then, I spun the chair. I stood up slowly, my eyes locked on his, and I unbuttoned the trench coat. I let the heavy wool slide off my shoulders and pool onto the floor. Underneath, I wasn't wearing the jeans and hoodie of a tech support girl. I was wearing the pristine, choker collar dress whites of the United States Navy, the broad gold stripe of a rear admiral wrapped around my sleeves, gleaming under the desk lamp, and the single silver star on my shoulder boards caught the light like a warning flare. The screaming had done its job. The door creaked open behind Miller, and I looked past his shoulder to see the hallway filled with his guests, the majors and captains who had been forced to endure his arrogance all night. They froze. They saw Miller, red-faced and trembling with rage, and then they saw me. The reaction was instantaneous, a reflex drilled into them since boot camp, overriding any confusion or shock. The senior guest, a battle-hardened major who looked like he'd seen combat while Miller was counting trucks, didn't hesitate. His spine snapped straight, his heels clicked together with a sharp crack, and his voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Admiral on deck." Miller froze. He looked at his men, confused by their sudden rigidity. Then, slowly, painfully, he turned back to me. He looked at the stripes on my sleeve. He looked at the star on my shoulder. I watched the realization hit him like a physical blow. The color drained from his face, leaving him a pale, trembling ghost of the bully he had been 10 seconds ago. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out, just a dry, terrified rasp. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I pitched my voice low, perfectly controlled, the tone of a commander addressing a catastrophic failure. "Colonel Miller," I said, stepping around the desk so I towered over him, "you are in violation of Article 133. Conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman. You are intoxicated, you are disorderly, and you are currently screaming at a superior officer. Explain yourself, now." He had spent weeks telling me to learn my place. As he stammered a broken apology in front of his own men, he finally realized I had just shown him his. The silence that followed my demand was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that settled over the room, broken only by the sharp, panicked intake of Colonel Miller's breath. The command dinner was effectively over, dissolved in the span of 30 seconds by the weight of a single rank insignia. The party atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by a rigid, terrified formality as the majors and captains, men and women who had spent the evening politely laughing at Miller's jokes, now looked at him as if he were a radioactive containment breach. I watched the dynamic in the room shift with the inevitability of a tide changing. The eyes that had been fixed on him with forced respect were now fixed on me with genuine awe. Miller tried to salvage it, of course. His ego was too bloated to die instantly. He stammered something about a misunderstanding, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips as he reached for a wine bottle to refill a glass that wasn't empty. But his hands? Those hands that he claimed had guided convoys through icy mountain passes were shaking so violently that the neck of the bottle chattered against the crystal rim. He spilled a dark red stain onto the white tablecloth he had forced my mother to iron, a perfect metaphor for the mess he had made of his own reputation. I looked at the stain, and then I looked at him, feeling the internal ledger of his insults finally balance out to zero. I didn't stay for the roast beef. The idea of sitting down and breaking bread with a man who had spent 3 weeks trying to break my spirit felt impossible. I turned to the senior major, the one who had called the room to attention. "As you were," I said softly, my voice carrying the easy authority that Miller had spent a lifetime trying to fake. "Please enjoy your evening. The colonel has a lot to teach you about how things used to be." The major nodded, a look of profound relief washing over him, and asked if I needed transport. "My driver is already outside," I replied, grabbing my trench coat from the floor where I had dropped it. As I walked toward the front door, the contrast between Miller's delusion and my reality arrived in the form of Petty Officer Jenkins. He was my official driver, a burly, silent professional who filled the doorway, his uniform impeccable. He didn't look at the colonel, he looked directly at me. "Admiral," he said, holding the door open, his posture sharp enough to cut glass. "We're cleared for departure to DC. Whenever you're ready, ma'am." I paused on the threshold, the cool night air hitting my face, and turned back one last time. My mother was standing in the hallway, wringing her hands, her eyes darting between her humiliated boyfriend and her unrecognizable daughter. I felt a pang of pity for her, a woman who had spent so long keeping the peace that she had forgotten how to fight a war. I walked over and took her hands, ignoring Miller, who was now leaning against the wall, looking gray and shrunken. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice low so the officers in the dining room wouldn't hear. You can date who you want, you can live where you want, but don't let him, or anyone else, treat you like a recruit in your own home. I glanced at Miller, who couldn't even meet my gaze. Rank stops at the door, Mom. Unless he invites it in. He invited it in tonight. Make sure he remembers who walked out. The drive away from the house felt like decompression. Sitting in the back of the armored government SUV, watching the Suburban, streetlights blur into streaks of amber, I finally let my shoulders drop. I didn't feel triumphant in the way Miller would have understood. I didn't feel the need to shout or brag. I just felt light. The weight of his judgment, which I hadn't realized I was carrying, was gone. Left behind on a wine-stained tablecloth. The consequences, as they often do in the military, traveled faster than official paperwork. A few weeks later, my grandfather called me, his voice thick with suppressed laughter. He told me that Buck Miller had put in his retirement papers abruptly, citing health reasons. But the NCO network, the true information highway of the armed forces, knew the truth. Word had gotten around the base that the loudmouth colonel had tried to browbeat a rear admiral in his own dining room and had been dressed down in front of his entire staff. He hadn't been fired, he had become a punchline. He was a laughingstock in the mess hall, the cautionary tale young officers told each other about the dangers of assuming you're the smartest person in the room. That was the only justice I needed. I didn't need to ruin his pension, his own arrogance had ruined his legacy. Months later, I stood on a stage at my own command ceremony. The room was filled with the quiet hum of servers and the rustle of dress uniforms. There was no shouting, no demands for respect, no performative displays of power. The men and women under my command didn't salute me because they were afraid of me. They saluted because they trusted me to lead them into the dark and bring them back out. I signed the final transfer orders, feeling the cool, heavy plastic of the pen in my hand, happy in my world of silence. I looked out at the sea of faces, competent, serious professionals, and I thought of Miller standing on his porch, small and gray in the rearview mirror. Rank isn't about who shouts the loudest in the kitchen, it's about who commands the room when the whispering starts. Colonel Miller demanded respect, I simply commanded it. Have you ever had to pull rank, figuratively or literally, on someone who underestimated you? Tell us your story in the comments. And if you believe respect is earned, not demanded, hit that like button.